Hey all, Colleen from Cultivated Candle Co here, and today I'm going to be sharing the history behind vintage fairy lamps, which are as magical as they sound, and we recently discovered they're a super fun way to enjoy our new sample candles. So I have personally been interested in fairy lamps for a long time. If you can't tell by me owning a candle company, I love anything that glows or sparkles, which is pretty much exactly what a fairy lamp does. So if you don't know what a fairy lamp is, it is actually a glass encasing where you can burn a candle on the inside and it adds a gorgeous glow. I'll show you the inside here. It perfectly fits our sample candles. It actually comes with this guy too if you have a different type of candle. We don't need to use it for our purposes because these guys fit snug. And I guess I should say our mushroom cutie, which is probably from the 80s, it's by Tierra Glass. It came with a glass piece. It doesn't mean the ones from the 50s will come with a glass piece, but like I said, regardless, we don't use it because we already have these guys. And it's pretty self-explanatory when going to use it. You just get your candle lit or you can light it once it's in there. It's up to you. But this guy fits in there pretty shallow, so I didn't feel uncomfortable lighting it before. And then you set the lid on and it is all set. It's super bright in here. I'll have to show some different angles so you can see the glow. But the prettiest part about fairy lamps is what they look like at night, which I'll share some history behind. So commonly when I am antiquing, I see fairy lamps all the time. So that kind of piqued my interest. And then my grandmother has some too. But since we work with our own vessels, whether it's our signature candles or vintage, we never really had a use for fairy lamps in our home until we introduced the sample candles. So while I was doing some online antiquing, I accidentally stumbled upon this vintage mushroom fairy lamp. But I stumbled upon it and then it just kind of clicked. Oh my goodness, this is such a cute way to use the sample candles. It was an impulse buy, but I'm so happy about it. And it's just a fun way to enjoy a smaller version of a candle, but still have that vintage feel. Many of the fairy lamps that I've come across while antiquing originate from mid-century, but they have a rich history that dates back to the late 1800s. So this guy is a much newer version. They weren't making mushroom fairy lamps in the late 1800s, but the 1880s was when you started to see fairy lamps put in use. They just looked a little different than this. It was around 1885 when fairy lamps were first introduced, and their main purpose was to make sure that the user could keep a candle burning overnight without a high risk of fire. Now, obviously we know today, even if you're using a covered candle, you should not leave it on overnight. But back then they were having so many issues with fires in the late 1800s. So having something covered was a solution. Because of this innovation and an additional home charm too, fairy lamps became very popular during this time as we're approaching the early 1900s. Even so that Queen Victoria loved them, and it is said that she ordered 1,500 for her own personal use. So of course, fairy lamps are kind of looked at as the first nightlight. And when they were marketed as making sure children weren't afraid of the dark, having, you know, a nice glowing light at night, how we look at nightlights now. And also for home security, kind of the concept being if a home has burning candles in them, there's people inside and burglars aren't going to target that house. That original variation of a fairy lamp was used through the 1920s. And then around mid-century, you start to see reproductions coming back into play, new designs. The fairy lamp kind of gained new life around mid-century. And that's not uncommon for vintage glass, as we've shared before, even with the honeybee dishes that we shared a few weeks ago, or any candy dish. A lot of the glassware we work with is from the 50s through the 80s, and all of those designs are based off of more traditional designs from the turn of the century, way back when. In my experience, I found that many of the mid-century fairy lamps were made by Fenton, where lamps made the 70s through the 90s these were made by Tiara Glass, which makes sense for our mushroom cutie. This is just one style of fairy lamp, but they really do vary in color, size, even pattern. So we have our mushroom cutie, but many fairy lamps, and really when I'm referring to the fairy lamps around mid-century, they have this type of covered look. As you can see, they come in many different styles, colors, even patterns too. Like how pretty would it be to have a carnival glass one? But they just have many different variations from cut glass. You can even find some in hobnail as well. So this vintage fairy lamp is the Tiara brand, which if you guys remember, that is the same company that produced the vintage honeybee candy dishes. So very similar to the bee dishes, these were sold at selling parties. So someone would host a Tiara glass selling party, invite their friends and family over to check out different glass variations, and sometimes including fairy lamps. So if you went to a Tiara glass or Indiana glass selling party, you are likely going to find different variations of products and also different products themselves. So we have the fairy lamps, the bee dishes, and you guys know we actually have other Tiara and Indiana glass that we work with, so variations of those items too. This is the box that our fairy lamp came in and would have come in if you would have bought it from one of those parties. Of course, have the Tiara glass branding, a proud made in the USA sticker, and the exact number. So if you were to search this exact number as a fairy lamp, it would pull up exactly this pink mushroom. And I saw something very interesting on here. It has someone's name. So who knows if Margaret was someone who ordered this when it was originally made, but kind of fun. Vintage fairy lamps are a magical addition to the home. Like, I am thinking I'm about to pull a Queen Victoria and order a bunch for our home. I just love the glow that they add, and it's even more fun that you can use a Cultivated Candle Co sample candle. Instead of just a scentless tea light, you can actually enjoy scent out of these guys because our sample candles are small enough to fit inside. And that's kind of what inspired sharing this video today. I just thought it would be fun to share history on something. You know, it's not something we directly use for our candles, but it's something that our candles can be used with, and I just think they're super cute. So I hope you enjoyed the historical information, and thank you so much for watching and just for being here.